Welcome. My name is Chad Turley, and I'll be the host and moderator for this ADEAL conference session. If possible, we'd ask that you turn on your camera so the presenters can see you. Make sure your mic is muted to minimize background noise. And if you'd like to offer nonverbal feedback, for example, a thumbs up, a clapping, or a heart, you can use the Zoom reactions. And there'll be time at the end of the session for questions and answers. Please note that by entering this ADEAL session that you acknowledge that you're aware of this session, that it'll be recorded and may be posted online with ADEAL content. This session will utilize the Zoom live transcription function, which produces subtitles at the bottom of your screen. Please note that the accuracy of the transcription is contingent upon a variety of factors, including background noise and the clarity and volume of the speaker's voice. Thank you for joining us today for an example of fostering intercultural competence in distance education. And please welcome Dr. Meg Milligan as our presenter.
Thank you, Chad. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. And I hope that perhaps it sparks an idea or gets some thinking going in whatever direction would be helpful to you. This is something that I learned and did in the class, and hopefully it has some value beyond just my single setting. So that's my hope for today and intention. I think we all agree that global learning is essential in today's increasingly interconnected world. We hear about internationalization, globalization, all of this stuff has become very important. One reason for this is employers' demands for a more globally aware and cross-culturally skilled labor force. And this adds a lot of pressure in our modern world. Market demands, which was not true previously, but is now, directly influence student enrollment, and our very livelihoods in reality are at stake, as our budget-minded administrators frequently remind us. But these are things that we have to be aware of, not just for professionally based training, which is doctors, lawyers, but for all of us, even those in arts and sciences, need to be more conscious of these forces and demands in our outside world. Although there's no consensual definition of culture, and I get some pushback from this, but I find that culture is a very general sort of construct, meaning all of those things and products that we produce that define us as a group, form some identity among us, and are passed along to future generations. Seems to be fairly general, but that's the idea. And that concept denotes an inherent sense of normality of one's culture and awareness of differences. That's the whole idea of cultural identity. This is who we are, and other people are different in some ways. And if we didn't have a sense of normality, certainly we would change. So we have these forces to deal with as well. Intercultural competence expands one's sense of normality and understanding of similarities and differences, as well as interconnections that bind us together as human beings. So I think it gains central importance for those reasons as well. And in addition, an ability to think outside the box or more creatively can be fostered through interactions in unfamiliar environments. And this translates into personal growth as well as more marketable job skills, as research supports. Academia is a key player in internationalization efforts. In UNESCO's words, 2015, education must be placed at the heart of the global development agenda. This is essentially what I'm covering in today's sessions. on to the next then, start with definitions and context. We talked about culture. I. You're welcome to chime in anytime you want to. Intercultural competence is or can be defined as the ability to think and act in interculturally appropriate ways. And being global means identifying with people around the world. These are best learned experientially rather than just through content in courses. So how do we help our students develop these skills? Pre-COVID-19, we relied primarily on study and internship abroad experiences and incorporating diversity content across the curriculum. Another avenue was partnering with educational institutions in other countries, which in essence is sharing students. And Troy University, like many others, pursued each of these. I included service projects outside of the home location, which I realize can be within a nation as long as it's in different cultural contexts that are not familiar to the group of people experiencing them. In this case, a group of students who would be experiencing them, though often these are in other countries as well. The diversity content across the curriculum, I've been around long enough that I've seen curriculum develop from very little concern about diversity, and particularly in psychology, since it has a history of Western development. Went back to the Greeks, into Europe, US, and that's pretty much the historical development. And whatever we learned in research, we could apply to everybody because we're all human beings. So we've moved considerably since that perspective, and realizing that's not necessarily so, and we need to investigate a lot more groups of people and other ways of thinking and longer history. But that went through up until we included diversity classes and of course across the curriculum, saying this is just part of every course that we need to be more aware of. And that essentially is learning about instead of learning experientially. Important, but only a step. Partnerships with other educational institutions, this has become pretty common. And more recently, COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning. And there is a presentation after this one. It will be very interesting by a couple of authors who investigated this, wrote a book about global COIL programs. It should be very interesting. Okay, this is a true story. I wrote this slide, then had a Facebook post about essentials of good writing, and one of the tips was good writing avoids alliteration always. I said, great. I will not adhere to this in terms of labeling a slide. So I came up with pedagogical pandemic perplexities provide predicaments, which is all true, but could be stated a lot more succinctly. But anyway, we have to have some fun here. Okay. Okay. What do we do about all the predicaments that the pandemic provided? Well, one avenue that was not blocked was via technology. So here we have no travel, sudden changes, no travel, no study abroad, no internship abroad, no service projects abroad. We had worldwide lockdowns, international partnerships suspended or shifted totally online, and many cultural and personal disruptions. So everything pretty much changed very dramatically, very quickly. In March of 2020, I was in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, teaching a class. And fortunately, by changing my routing 3 times, I managed to complete that teaching and return to the US on March 11th, when everything suddenly shut down. Complete world change. So what do we do once we, recover from the shock? I'm not sure that's accurate. We are still recovering from the shocks and adjusting. And many of these concerns are ongoing. But what do we do to try to mitigate them, try to adjust, and provide some important learning experiences for our students? That is a dilemma. I threw in the concepts of carpe diem and serendipity because this is the essence of what I experienced. And it's not the first time and hopefully not the last, but it worked well in this situation. And I like etymology, so I threw this in, carpe diem, seize or pluck the day. We all know what that means. Carpe is the second person singular present active imperative of carpo. We wonder, it's actually no surprise why Latin has been dropped from mandatory high school curricula, which it used to be, Greek and Latin. But can you imagine trying to remember all of those conjugations? Anyway, and carpo means pick a pluck, used by Horace to mean enjoy, seize, use, make use of, sort of pluck the day as it is right. It's kind of nice to see that gets more of the essence of what carpe diem means. And this directly links to serendipity, which, the chance occurrence and development of events. And this has to be in some way that is happy or beneficial. I like that too. My unsolicited advice: pounce on serendipitous opportunities. And by being open to them, aware, chance observations can have meaningful outcomes. And I think as educators, we should be encouraged to do that and make changes rather than stick to tight structures. And this is an example of that. This is okay. Like many people, I include applied projects in every class I teach, but many of them are group projects as well. And the benefits are obvious here. Provides experience working in teams, which is a skill valued by employers and useful in the outside world, one's personal life as well as work life. The group project ends with a PowerPoint or videotaped presentation in class. I've done this in class, can be done easily online or virtually. And then students have an opportunity to develop a poster or paper and present it at a conference. We have the Troy University Annual Psychology Conference, which is a nice, low stress venue or introduction to professional presentations. So these are all important skills that students can learn in addition to the content of whatever the class is. Doesn't matter what the class is, you can incorporate this sort of project into it, and maybe you have. These These experiences will add to their resumes and skill sets. And both of those are important in addition to their knowledge, expanding knowledge in the field, whatever the course focuses on. Early COVID, then of course, everything changed when the pandemic hit. So early COVID, I changed this to campus-based environments, and that would be online asynchronously. Can do this in Teams, Zoom. We use email, texting, WhatsApp, Google Docs, whatever. There's a variety of technologies that can be used to achieve similar goals without having the in-class presence of other students. There are other ways to do this. So I had to shift very quickly to those formats. And there were it's learned by trial and error. So there were some successes, some things didn't work that well, and they certainly don't work equally well for all students. So it's trying to figure this out. And I did that with my US-based classes, and also had the challenges of how do I deliver this class in Malaysia. The pre-COVID-19 set structure was, it's a 15-week semester. We have a 2-week fly-in for intensive coursework and other experiences, intensive 2 weeks. And that worked very well. Of course, student engagement, I got to know them, they knew me. We had a lot of opportunities that we no longer had now that went totally online. There are also cohorts moving through. So although I knew students in the previous cohorts, you do this for a couple of semesters and you have a lot of new students come in and there are challenges there. So a lot of these things were challenges, problems that need to be solved for students in a very different culture, and for students in our online classes, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. So we had a blended class format. And the applied projects that I used in Malaysia were applying what they learned to their cultural contexts, and then presenting them at the Troy University psychology conference. So they were learning new skills, they were applying what they learned to their locations, and having some interaction with our US-based university. And then we would have a certificate presentation ceremony in Malaysia, which was also very important in recognizing their achievements. And this not only gave them additional skills, but something they could add to their resumes, and something they had not really been trained to do. So being able to do develop a poster or paper, present at the conference, it was working well. When we had our on-campus conferences, I would present their posters for them, and then we'd have photographs and do the certificate awards. So that was working well. And spring of 2020 was the last pre-COVID-19 normal in that respect. Okay. Fall and spring were online. Had some attempts at synchronous Zoom classes. They were difficult because of time zone, tremendous time zone differences. And also once they were in lockdown, and when they went online, many students went home. There were students on different continents, different locations around Malaysia. It became very difficult. They had different schedules for each campus. I conducted a doodle poll. I had 60 students there. Tried to conduct a doodle poll to find, well, is there any day and hour? Could we have, 1 hour, hour and a half on any day? I was willing to, I don't care, 3 in the morning my time, that's okay. Can we do this? And it was not possible. You couldn't get more than about 60% of the students on any day and time. So that was frustrating. Also have the cultural differences. The students there equate silence with respect, and there's a deference to authority, which was not a problem when I was there physically with them and got to know them. But Zoom, it was very difficult. So we didn't have the interactions that we needed, the kind of engagement that enriches a class. So I posted recorded lectures. That's okay. It's not really enough. And there are a lot of internet issues too, spotty internet, all of these sorts of things in their home with a lot of things going on in the background. It was really not satisfactory for student engagement of the way that we are accustomed to, and certainly not for faculty-learner interaction. The stress from lockdowns and disease, family, work disruptions, life was far from normal for anyone. I think one thing that's often overlooked is, faculty and staff also are living with these sorts of stresses. It's been difficult for a lot of reasons. And you add academics to the mix, and it's kind of compounds all of these effects. So I learned through trial and error, and with each iteration and a lot of frustration trying to come up with some different ideas that might work. So fall 2021, it just happened the way scheduling was, that I was scheduled to teach forensic psychology for Troy in a 9-week online delivery format, and Malaysia with their semester long, which now was online, thinking that if things change, there'll be a fly-in, but I don't think anyone was counting on that. Just hopeful, but didn't happen, as you all know. So travel is still restricted. So I had these two groups, and it occurred to me, well, I can do something, a group project with my online and Malaysia students interacting in groups on a task-oriented project. I'm not aware if this has been done before at our university. If it has been, then we have poor communication, which is also a problem I see in many institutions. But this is what occurred to me, that it was an opportunity to try this. So I made some changes and added a new group assignment to include students in each class so they can collaborate on projects, learn from each other, learn about each other and their cultures and countries. And they could present their work in an asynchronous conference style, which was that was the best we could do, which worked fine. And also, those who were interested could develop posters to present at next year's psychology conference. So that's what we did. Even though we had the the 9 weeks, which really ends up to be 8 weeks to complete this entire project, so that the US online students could finish their course. And so we accomplished quite a bit in that short period of time, in addition to everything else they're doing in the class. It was a lot. It took a lot of extra work from me and a lot of work from them, but we'll see what the student evaluation feedback is. The informal feedback I got was very positive, but we will see. What I did was I pitched it in a business context. This is something that I think would be relatable to anyone. That told them, you know, you're working for an international company and you're assigned to a group project with a defined task, a timetable, reports and presentations are due at specified times. And I wrote 10 topics for the groups. We had over 100 students. We had 10 topics, and told them they could also come up with ideas themselves, as I wanted to open it up to their creativity or their particular interest. What I think these are important to cover, these areas in our class, but add a couple yourselves. And they did. Came up with some very interesting topics as well. Formed groups. We used Teams, which everyone has access to as part of the university. Both groups had access to Teams, and SharePoint, because that was something that also everyone had access to. So I set up the SharePoint groups, and they signed up. And of course, there's always a few who don't sign up, so I assign them and make sure that the groups are fairly evenly distributed. And then they were expected to work together and solve these problems. And it was very interesting to see that, you know, the usual complaints and emails I'd get about, well, I haven't heard from this person, or, you know, I don't know if we can get this done. And I would help. You know, these are challenges you're going to face. And it's better to face them in a college context than it is when you're in the real world and suddenly this is part of your job and you're expected to do it. I also found that since they were in groups, we could meet synchronously. So even with the time zone differences, a small group was able to come up with a date and time, and they would let me know, and we would have synchronous meetings on Teams, which was very nice. It helped me stay engaged, and then they could have their own meetings, of course, and interact in whatever way made sense to them using whatever technologies. But they were required to post certain types of information on Teams for progress reports, and we used SharePoint to upload their videos of their final group presentation. And then students would look at those and provide peer-reviewed feedback for formative assessment. And this is something that is also difficult. It's difficult for a lot of students in the US to do. It is also different. I mean, it was more difficult, I think, for the Malaysia group, who are not used to saying anything remotely negative or critical. So to learn how you can give, you know, evaluative feedback in ways that help people improve by pointing out a weakness or something, a question you might ask that could strengthen your project, turn it into a positive instead of a negative, I think was also valuable for students to figure out how to do this. And if they didn't, if they just put the pluses, put some strengths, things you like, if that's all they did, they lost points. You know, it's kind of real world consequences. And of course, I would give them feedback on their feedback and that kind of thing. So it did take a lot of extra time for me. So but I think it's rewarding, and I will consider ways. I've learned a lot in the process, and will consider ways to try to do this again if I have, well, the same class. It might also be interesting. See, now I'm coming up with ideas too. It might be interesting to try that with students in different courses. You know, they don't necessarily have to be in the same course in order to have a meaningful group project. So that's yeah. I think I'll try that. I'll try that next. See how we can do that so it'd be valuable to both. And of course, we're all encouraged to have cross-disciplinary connections in our class, whether it's within your discipline or cross disciplines. So I think that could be next. I also required them to have a project director, because you'll always have, you know, a supervisor who is ultimately responsible for making sure that this is completed and that the timelines are met, or at least communicating with me, with, you know, higher levels in the chain of command as to why they might be a little late with this, to, you know, negotiate extensions and that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of valuable learning that can take place with this kind of approach, or with any number of other options that, you know, you might have great ideas on. How do you connect people from other locations or other disciplines so that students learn more about other cultures, other countries, what it's like to work with a more diverse group than just your classmates in this particular class. And one way to start establishing this network is through international conferences. And this lockdown is really taken a toll with my not being able to travel, because I'm used to presenting at international conferences and, you know, taking students on study abroads, and, you know, we're teaching Malaysia and all this kind of stuff. But international conferences are great ways to meet people at universities or administrators or whomever in different places, and form some connections. Then, well, maybe you'll get a guest speaker, someone either live or recorded, or who's willing to answer student questions. Can do that too. Here's a list of questions. You know, would you mind answering them from your perspective? Could just add some enriched content to your class. So I think there are many opportunities that we as faculty have not been trained. We certainly have not been told that we can be more creative. We've, I think, been trained more in syllabus construction, sticking to the syllabus, and here's, and, you know, we've got the course learning objectives that have to link to the unit learning objectives, link to the assignments, and let's stick to that. Need some discussions and that kind of thing. And I think there's a lot more that we can do. And as I said, there's another presentation coming up on COIL that it will also be fascinating to find out what other places are doing and trying to help their students with meeting those sorts of goals. Benefits, lots of benefits. Strengthens university ties among students, brand, in business terms. Forges interactions, understanding, and possible networks and friendships. Synchronous group meetings are workable, while entire class meetings may not be. New skills, a lot of new skills, some of which we're not even aware of. You know. But and solving group task challenges in an international group. So I think there are tremendous opportunities when we start linking people together and setting up these interactions, helping people deal with them. So that's basically what I have to say and come up with. Who cares? I love the squirrel. That's a classic. So I'm wondering if anyone wants to add some ideas or thinking or comments or anything you'd like to say. Well, maybe something I said can percolate.
Yeah. First of all, I'm sorry I'm late, but I had another commitment. You may have covered this, but were there occasions when you had to know Malay or had to explain something with a Malay word?
No, I'm not much of a linguist. I'm glad you brought that up because the language of instruction is English. Malaysia has a British background. So their English is widely taught in their school system and is sort of a language that unifies everyone. They're essentially three ethnic groups in Malaysia that are prominent. You have the Malays, India, many people from India, and Chinese, and then they have some, indigenous and some other much smaller groups. But those are the three essentials. So everyone in the education system has to learn Malay. That's government edict. And then depending on their group identification, of course, they would learn their own language or dialect and English.
Right.
So.
Okay. And if I may ask one other thing, you may have covered this as well, but the psychology conference that's coming up, is that international?
I'm going to. I internationalized it in 2018 when I just decided to include my Malaysian students. Now we do have some contributions from a few people in other countries, and I think those are contacts, faculty contacts. But it's that started out as just a little local, like so many things do. A faculty member decided, well, we need a conference. This would be helpful to our students, so they started a little conference on the main campus, and it has grown over the years. So it's well established. Yeah, now we have that.
Okay, will it include any, let's say, social psychology of international learning, or is it more just theoretical psychology being discussed?
Oh no, it's wide open for topics.
Okay.
There are a lot of research studies. I know a faculty member who teaches experimental psychology. He has a lot of his students doing research experiments, and you can do survey work. It can be theoretical. I mean, it's really wide open.
Okay.
Philosophy fits in there, So yeah, it's a great it's a great little conference, and we have a lot of interesting ideas. It's been virtual the past 2 years, which has been nice since people can register and really join from any place. So that's been a positive. Of course, we missed the in-person presence. Yeah, it's always a trade-off. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have my thank you slide.
Well, thanks, Meg. We want to thank you for your time and effort and for your presentation. We want to thank the attendees and those that may watch the video later, and remind everyone about the asynchronous activities that are listed in the conference program that you can participate in, and enjoy the rest of the ADL conference. Thank you.
Well, thank you.